my story is, this is my second time to be on. My story is about, it's called Tea for the Priest. There's some writing coming up in front of my face. How do I get rid of that?
Oh, so Mary, just see where it says chat. Hopefully, just hit the word chat so that you can hide the chat there, so that it's not a distraction to you. But even if you're not able to, maybe people could hold off. Oh, great, lovely.
I think that's all right now. Yeah.
Lovely.
Anyway, my story is about tea, of course. It's about tea for the priest. I wasn't in the habit of making tea for priests. In fact, I was always very anxious if priests came into the house. So I was quite apprehensive about the upcoming event where I would be responsible for making not just the tea, but a full breakfast for the priest, full cooked breakfast. Let me explain the event. It was 1959. In those days, there was a custom in rural areas that twice every year in the spring and again in October or the autumn, a few houses in each parish would be expected to hold mass in their homes for the benefit of the neighbours. It was called the station. If your house happened to be chosen, you had no option but to agree. The parish priest would stand up on the altar on a Sunday and announce the names of the people who were to take the station, or as I said, who were complimented with the station. And it was, as I said, wasn't really a compliment because you had to do it. But most people obeyed. And we always knew the Sunday when it would be announced. Then people would be sitting up, paying attention, looking nervously in case their name would be announced. Although it wasn't often that anybody refused, as I say, to hold Mass. Nobody ever refused. On this particular Sunday, I sat up in the gallery of the chapel with my friend. We were talking about getting a lift to the dance that night, who was going to take us. I suddenly sat up and I heard my father's name being called out. We were to hold the station in our house. Well, we were usually given a few months to prepare. The house would have to be painted both inside and out. Even the outhouses, the barn, the byre, the hen house, would all be painted. All the windows cleaned and painted, cupboards turned out, all the dishes, china and cutlery washed several times. Of course, there was no dishwashers in those days. It was the old Stanley range was blackened and polished until you could see your face in it. It was important for cooking. Remember, we only had electricity for a short time then. We hadn't got a toaster, an electric cooker either. So the cooking had to be done on the range or on the open fire. The kitchen was the warmest room in the house. This is where the Sacred Heart picture hung, along with John F. Kennedy and Jacqueline. Mass was usually celebrated in the best room, which would be prepared, papered and painted. New curtains we bought and all the pictures would be taken down and cleaned. Confession, which was a big thing, would usually be held in a bedroom before Mass. It too was decorated, the beds covered with new bed covers. It needed to look nice, you see, because the people would be looking around to see any faults that they might gossip about to the neighbours, or they might be distracted and forget to tell their sins. The other big thing that had to be planned was the priest's breakfast, which would be served after he celebrated Mass. He had been fasting from midnight the previous evening and would need a nice breakfast. This required planning by the woman of the house, which in this case was me, even though I was only in my teens. My mother had passed away when we were very young, and the housekeeping was left to me as I grew up. I was nervous at the thought of cooking the breakfast until my friend Mary Kitty promised to help me. As I said, she had spent a month of her summer holidays working as a maid, and that's what she was called as for the priest. So she enlightened me, telling me what he preferred to eat. In our house, breakfast was simple. My father and my brothers would have a boiled egg, soda bread before rushing out to the farm. But now Mary told me that the Father Devlin, liked a cooked breakfast, bacon and egg, etc. Well, I could cope with that as long as the fire in the Stanley range was kept alive with good turf. Then Mary pointed out that he liked a particular type of tea. He liked a particular type of tea, and the name of the tea was Earl Grey. I had never heard of Earl Grey. So I thought, because I thought Earl Grey was a woman, but somebody told me not to be stupid. An Earl is a man. But I thought all those Earls had gone years ago, I said. But when I discovered that it was tea, I played around with the word, rolling it around on my tongue. Earl Grey, Earl Grey, Earl Grey. So my father said, for God's sake, Mary, just give him the same tea as the rest of us. I'm sure you wouldn't be able to buy that kind of tea in the shops around here anyway. But I hadn't forgotten. I wanted everything to be perfect for the priest. Then something else was rumoured. Some people were serving the priest grapefruit at breakfast. Trying to impress. Sure, it's far from grapefruit. They were rare, my friend laughed. Grapefruit was never used in our house because we never had quality. But I suppose you could call the priest quality. So my friend and I decided to go to Derry to see if we could find a shop that sold Earl Grey tea. After trying several shops and being asked, people shaking their heads. What, the woman laughed. You mean to tell me that you drink that kind of tea in Donegal? She's taking a hand at us, my friend whispered. Finally, we found a big shop that sold both Earl Grey and grapefruit as well. So later at home, first thing we did was to try out the tea. It must be good if it's Earl's drink it, I said. We giggled and poured 3 teaspoonfuls into the pot. My father was waiting, as he had heard so much about this tea. He took a mouthful and shook his head. For God's sake, give me a decent cup of tea. Sure, this is pure innocent water, scalded to death. But we got it for the priest, we both argued. Well, if you think that's what he wants. Posh people drink it, I said. Posh people, my arse, he said. He put on his cap and went out to shut the cattle in for the night. On the morning of the station, we were all up at the crack of dawn. The fires needed to be lit and the cows milked. My aunt arrived to help me to get the room ready for Mass. We set the table like an altar with candles and flowers. When the priest came, we showed him to the bedroom where he could hear confession. My father took courage and went in first. Others followed in turn. I was not worried about going to confession. I was far too worried about making the priest's breakfast, on who we could ask to sit at the table with them. It was the custom to invite a couple of men to sit at the table with the priest during breakfast. Now, it would be my father and 2 local men. It was always men, you see. Women were never invited. I could say it was because they were always too busy. As soon as the Mass was over and the room was cleared, the table was set for breakfast with our best china and cutlery. I had borrowed some special cutlery to use for the grapefruit, but in the end, I just put plates of grapefruit down on the table for everyone who wanted it, but only the priest ever touched it. My friend helped me to cook the bacon and eggs on the range. My aunt did toast by holding it in front of the fire. When the kettle was boiled, I warmed our only china teapot, which had rarely been used. It was kept especially in case we ever had company. Now we did have company. Remembering my father's comment about the tea the previous time, I thought that I'd better make it a bit stronger this time. So I put in 6 teaspoonfuls to the pot. I poured the tea, happy with myself that I'd managed to acquire the Earl Grey. I stood back and observed the men at the table. I could see them all pulling faces. Even the priest pulled a face. What is this, Mary? He was frowning. My father was holding a handkerchief over his mouth. That's Earl Grey, Father. Oh, I see, that's what it is. I could see that he wasn't impressed. I was told that it was your favourite tea, Father. My face was getting more and more flushed. Sorry, dear, he wiped his mouth. I think someone had got the wrong story. He laughed then, and the others looked confused. Once I was asked to have tea with the Archbishop of Armagh, and that's the tea they served. He chuckled and put his hand over his tummy. I'll never forget it, he said. I told the story often. That's where the crossed lines came in. I was becoming more and more flustered. Luckily, my friend, having overheard the conversation, quickly made tea from our normal tea box, and chatter resumed, and my embarrassment was soon forgotten. People still hold the station mass in their houses. The difference today is that you can choose to take the station mass. It's not imposed on them. And it mostly takes place in the evening. The breakfast and the tea has been replaced by the offer of sandwiches and a glass of wine or two, or maybe a glass of whiskey. And over the subsequent years, Mary and I had many a good laugh about the story of the Earl Grey tea.
Mary, that's so beautiful. Thank you so much. You tell it so stunningly in terms of all the pressure.
So nervous.
Beautiful. Oh, well, you're a magnificent writer and storyteller. Thank you so much.
It's just true story.
Oh, yeah. The pressure on the families to paint the rooms and the barns and everything and all that. Yeah. It's huge pressure, isn't it?
And it's true that people would be sitting in the chapel at Mass and knowing the Sunday that would be announced, and they were all looking around and hoping it wouldn't be them, because it was a lot of work.
Yeah, enormous. Well, a lot of work for the women in the house.
For the women, exactly. Yeah. The men would be outside painting the house, I suppose. And
yes, yeah.
On a farm, it couldn't always be clean outside either.
No, my God. What parish was that in, Mary?
Malin.
Oh, in Malin.
Malin, Inishowen, yeah.
Yeah. Gorgeous. What a stunning story. We had station masses in the village that I'm from in Carrigaline as well.
All right.
And yeah. I remember our parish priest shouting at people to say, don't be buying new things. But inevitably people would, because there was still the pressure that if the priest was coming into the house,
yeah, and that's true, Paul. Is it Paul? I'm speaking to.
I'm Padraig, yeah.
And I remember as a child when people had thatched houses.
Yeah.
They would have to renew the thatch and whitewash that side as well.
It's not cheap. Yeah. No. Such pressure. Well, that's fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah.